Okay, I think we'll get started. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Renuka Srinivasan, and on behalf of Clinical Trials Ontario, welcome to this Research Ready Mentor Spotlight webinar titled Clinical Trial Budgets Demystified. Through the Mentor Spotlight webinar series, experts share best practices and highlight exceptional processes relevant to the clinical research community in Ontario and Canada. We aim to be interactive in the live sessions, but we also post a recording through the CTO website where you can find more information about these webinars. We also provide a certificate of attendance for those who join the live session and would like a record for CE purposes. We ask that you complete a short feedback survey that'll appear on the screen at the end of the webinar. We welcome any feedback you have or suggestions on topics or speakers that you would like to see at a future session. So you can share that feedback with us through the survey or by contacting us directly. I'll make a quick note. Today's session is scheduled just for 1 hour, so apologies if you received the Zoom invite. That was for 90 minutes before we corrected that. So we will conclude in 1 hour. Today's webinar will begin with presentations from each of our speakers, followed by a very short mediated Q&A portion, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. So if you can hold your questions till the end, we would appreciate that. And then I'll invite attendees to unmute yourself to ask your question, or you can post your questions in the chat, and I'm happy to review that and bring those questions to our speakers. So as we get started today, let me introduce our speakers, and then I'll put up a short poll so that you can also tell our speakers a little bit about where you're from today. So our speakers today are Ivana Kandic, Evelyn Lowe, and Bala Sivaraja. Ivana is a research coordinator with Unity Health Toronto, and she has over 10 years of clinical trial experience, including her CCRP certification through SOCRA. Currently, Ivana's work is focused in interventional cardiology device trials, and through this webinar, she will be sharing her experience and site perspectives on budgeting for clinical trials. Evelyn is a senior clinical operations lead at Roche, where she provides financial management to clinical operations. Evelyn is a chartered public accountant and has worked at Roche for 15 years in various roles, including business unit controller and study payment manager. Bala is a clinical operations lead at Roche. He oversees all financial aspects of Canadian clinical trials. He's worked at Roche for over 5 years and has experience with payments, forecasting, budget creation, and budget negotiations. Bala is a CPA and has a Bachelor of Commerce from Toronto Metropolitan University. So as we get started, I'm going to launch a very quick poll just to get a sense for our speakers, just to see kind of where everyone is joining us from today. So if you don't mind answering this poll, just to kind of give us a sense of what organization you work at, or where your role is based, and then we can sort of share that with our speakers, and then we'll get started. Oh, I see a lot of responses coming in, which is great. I'll give it another few quick seconds. Okay, looks like we're done. I'm going to end the poll. All right. Are you able to see the results there?
Yes.
Okay. So about half, it looks like, are from sort of the academic medical centers, which is our typical audience for webinars. And then a few others you can see there. So perfect. Thank you again for sharing your responses with us. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ivana. Let me just move my slides, and then we'll begin. Okay, Ivana, let me know when you can see the slide there.
Yes, I'm okay.
Okay,
I can see them.
perfect. All right, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Renuka. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ivana Kandic. I'm a research coordinator for the interventional cardiology team at the St. Michael's Hospital, Unity Health in Toronto. And I hope that information that I share today with you will be helpful for your work. What we do as a team is when we receive the regulatory documents from the sponsor, including the budget, We review all of them carefully. May I please have the next slide, Veronica? Thank you. So that includes the study protocol, any imaging protocols, any lab manuals, CRFs. The reason for that is to establish what procedures and assessments are standard of care and what procedures and assessments are not standard of care. Every protocol will at somewhere have a table that will include the schedule of assessments. It will basically tell you what needs to be done for every study visit. Sometimes the protocols do not have this table, but there is a description of assessments for each visit required by the protocol. Sometimes the description is not very clear. So in that case, you actually need to take a look at the CRFs, because CRFs will include everything that will be required to be entered in the database, meaning all the assessments that need to be performed for the study visit. The purpose of this review is, as I said, to establish what is standard of care, what is not standard of care, because every assessment and every procedure that is not standard of care, the sponsor is required to compensate the site for. I will give you an example for our trials. Our trials are device trials, and we rely a lot on imaging, different types of imaging, CT scans, different types of heart ultrasounds. So for example, we will have the imaging assessment at the certain time point, and it will seem like it's a standard of care. But then reading the protocol, we can realize that the sponsor requires a lot more pictures, a lot more different views taken that are not usually standard of care. For this, my advice is to make friends with team leaders. We have excellent imaging department, and we have a very, very good relationship with a team leader for our echo department. And when we receive the protocol, we will go and we will ask the team lead to tell us what exactly is the standard views that they take, what measurements are standardly included in the echo report, which ones are not. So then with this information, we can go back to the sponsor and we can tell them these assessments, these views are not standard of care for our site, and we will require a payment for those. Principal investigator can also help to a point, because sometimes if the principal investigator, for example, is not a specialist for imaging, they will also not be fully aware of what exactly is the standard for the institution and what is not. If I can have the next slide. Yes, thank you. So pretty much the same applies, for example, to the blood work. For our study protocols, there is a lot of blood work that is required by the study protocol. And sometimes the blood test is the standard of care, but not for the certain time point. For example, our device patients are seen 30 days and 1 year after the procedure. That is the standard of care. A lot of our protocols, study protocols, requires the study visit at 6 months after the study procedure. So regardless of what blood test, for example, is required at 6 months, maybe it's CBC, lights, something that it's a standard of care usually, but not at that particular time point. So we always request for those assessments to also be reimbursed by the sponsor. Next slide, please. So once you go through the study assessments and you have these conversations with different team leaders and different departments, you also might want to add the administrative cost. One of the costs is the startup cost for the site. For example, the time required to prepare REB application, time required to collect the regulatory documents, time required for the responses to the research ethics board, time required for the investigator and coordinator training. Also, if you're using other departments, for example, like a core lab or imaging department or pathology, those departments will also have their own startup fees that you will need to include in the budget. We also include the time for the REB renewals, the amendments to the protocol, depending on is it includes changes to the consent form or not. The screen, the screen failure payments. Some sponsors prefer to pay the flat fee per screen failure. Some sponsors prefer to pay for the assessments that are entered in the database. That depends on the sponsor, so it can be either or. Also, do not forget to include the institutional overhead. Different institutions will have different percentage overhead for different trials. At our institution, for the industry trials, the overhead is 35%. There is a different percentage that is charged for the studies that are investigator-initiated and financed by grants. But usually that is something that you can talk to the research administration in your institution, and they're quite helpful with us. They're very helpful and communicative, and any questions that we have regarding institutional requirements, they are very fast to respond to us and have answers ready for us. So in terms of the budgeting on the site side, these are the most important things that we include in our budget. There are other things that we also include, for example, the transportation stipend for the patients. We are a center that receives the patients from all around the province. So we try to alleviate their transportation costs as much as we can. Of course, we cannot pay them to be in the study, but if they're coming down from, for example, Sault Ste. Marie for the study visit, we can definitely try to help them with, parking or mileage cost, something that will be helpful to them. So these are the most important things that I wanted to draw your attention to. Hopefully it will be useful for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ivana. That was very helpful. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now and pass it on to Bala and Evelyn.
Thank you, Renuka. One moment here, we'll set up.
Okay, we can see your screen.
Thank you, Renuka. Thank you, Ivana. Honestly, just seeing your presentation there is pretty much very similar from me and Evelyn, just the sponsor side of everything. So today, me and Evelyn will be talking about budgeting and fair market value. That includes the budget creation for the SOA or visit costs, invoiceable costs, and then we'll also talk about fair market value. And at the end, I'll touch on the travel reimbursements and stipends. So to start, I wanted to talk about the schedule of assessments. What you see here is an unblinded copy. When we send it out to the sites, you won't see the unit cost medium column and the grant plan code column. So this is pulled from what Ivana mentioned earlier, the protocol where you see the SOA. We have to process that into our budget. So I want to bring attention to the first top half here where it says procedures. This is all of the patient procedures that they'll experience throughout the study. The bottom half here are the non-procedures. This is where we like to put in everything that we need to pay for investigator time, study coordinator time, nursing time, and data management, which is the fee that we'll pay for the sites to gather all the information from the visits and put it into the CRF. Then at the bottom here, this is where we calculate our subtotals. Like Ivana was saying, we have the overhead. Some sites will do 30%, so we have 30% here. And then we also have, for Roche, we have a standard patient stipend of $100 for every in-clinic visit. Next, I want to talk about the actual grid here. So once we get past the procedures, the code, all the behind the curtain stuff, we have the actual visits, and we do our best to compile them together so that it's not a messy grid. So here we have screening, cycle 1, 2, 3, and then we combined a bunch of them because those visits are practically the same, just at different time points. One thing that I do want to bring attention to are the procedure frequency, and it just helps with reading our budget. So you'll see here, for certain procedures, you'll see 1, 2, or an INV for invoiceable. The 1 just means it's only going to occur once in that visit, and sometimes you'll see a 2. In this example, we have blood draws and samples, so maybe it happened at 2 different time points for the visit. And finally, one more important thing here is, for the most part, from Roche, anything you see here, it will be paid automatically on a quarterly basis. However, if for the final cost of the visit, you see an INV, that means that we're not going to pay that automatically. We expect our sites to invoice us for that. The next part of the budget are the invoiceables. So what you just saw on the previous slide where everything was INV, you'll see the procedures in the top half, and then our site costs in the bottom half here. So like Ivana was mentioning, screen failure for the flat fee. So Roche, we do a flat fee for the most part, where we try to get all the entire cost of screening put into our invoiceable budget. For example, sometimes tumor assessments, we don't know which one, so that might be an invoiceable. So we do that. We also put in rescreening in case that's the case for a certain patient. And like I mentioned earlier, the unscheduled visit is added here. And just similar to the SOA, we also include overhead for every item. And then for the visits, we also put in the patient reimbursement of $100. Don't pay attention to the numbers. I just put 100 here just for presentation purposes. But I do want to highlight the yellow chest MRI and all the CT scans. So normally in the protocol, it would probably ask for a tumor assessment, and that could mean it could be a CT scan or an MRI scan. How we handle it at Roche is that we take the more expensive of the two, which is going to be an MRI, and we put the quantity for the MRI, we leave it blank for CT, just so that way the maximum compensation for the study will be maximized. I mean, if the site has to use a CT, great, it'll be less cost, but it's there just in case we need it. So the columns here on our invoiceable section is quantity. So the amount of times each patient will have a specific procedure. And then we have our unit cost. Again, the overhead from the previous slide, which was 30%, it gets carried over here. And then we have our subjects that we expect to recruit. So in this example, it was 2. And then we just do a simple multiplication and we get the total cost on the side. And then we have the site costs, which, as Ivana mentioned earlier, for like startup, all your ethics fees, your annual fees, archiving, we include that. Anything that's not driven by patient activity is pretty much a site cost, and we include that here. And so let's talk about how we actually cost the budget. So we use fair market value, and it's based on industry standard costs that are pulled from a program that we have a subscription to through IQVIA. It's called Grant Plan. Those costs are updated quarterly, and what we're given through Grant Plan is for every line item, for example, let's say like a complete physical exam. So it includes vitals, inclusion, exclusion criteria, everything, weight, height. They give us three pricings. There's a low, medium, and a high. What we do is we make a medium budget and a high budget. We start off with the medium budget, but then we also incorporate our historical budgets with the site. Like, why would we come with the lesser cost if we've already negotiated it before? So we'll incorporate that and we'll create the budget and we'll send it out to the sites. And then from there, we start the negotiation process. I'll let Evelyn take it away.
Right, thank you, Bala. Okay. All right, so as Bala said, when we have the budget ready, we will send out the initial offer to the site. And then this is, at the site level, in their hands that, they will review it and then come back to us, like either telling us, if they accept our offer, or they are going to provide us with some counter offer, or, some other extra fee that, we need to review internally. So of course, when we have the budget come back to us asking for more money or some extra fee, we will need the site to provide us some justification or documentation to see why we have to pay the extra fee, or if the fee that they ask is above the fair market value. So this is, basically, that, as a sponsor, I need to have all this justification and documentation to back up our decision, why we pay more to the site. And that will, pass our FMV process. And then this is the escalation process. We have it internally. And then basically, this is just, what we I mentioned about, like we need justification and documentation to support our decision about paying up more than the fair market value. And some of the clinical site, we have some specific rate card. So, for the rate card, we have negotiate a certain fee, a fixed fee for like 2 to 3 years. And then, for that rate card, it just, help us to move our budget negotiation faster, shorter. And for all this documentation that we require, to support us, like for the FMV escalation, this is what we need to document, just in case for audit. All right, so that is for the negotiation and FMV escalation. So I pass it back to Bala for the patient stipend.
Thank you, Evelyn. So as we mentioned earlier, Roche's standard is $100 per visit. So that stipend, as Ivana mentioned earlier, includes mileage, transportation, meals, parking. Now we also include stipends that are beyond the 100, but they're not really present on the budget. We have that wording in our contracts where the site will have to get pre-approval from the study team. So this could probably happen when the site learns where a patient is coming from and if they're going to try to be enrolled. And what we do in that case is costing for gas. We use CRA's reasonable per kilometer allowance. For example, this year was 68 cents per kilometer. And I believe that's for the first 5,000 kilometers. Another rule that we have is that, air travel, it can't be first or business class, nothing egregious. Same with lodging, probably not the best idea to have like a luxury hotel, right? And then another point that I want to bring across is that stipends over 500 without the form of receipt. So meaning that those stipends, the $100 stipend for the visits, if a patient ever receives about 500 throughout the calendar year, 500 or more, then the site is responsible to issue a T4A for that patient. And yeah, that's everything that me and Evelyn want to talk about regarding budgets.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Ivana. Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you, Vala. That was very informative, and I can I already see some questions coming through the chat. But let me get things started off with just a few questions. And we did have a few questions that came in prior as part of the registration too. But I appreciate that you talked about patient reimbursements as part of your process, and you're considering all those pieces, because we do know that, you know, participating in a study can present some additional challenges and barriers and burdens for participants, right? Whether that's extra visits, whether that's extra testing, taking equipment home and trying to manage those things and keep track of diaries and stuff. So, you know, you talked a little bit about, you know, having patient stipends, but I'm wondering, you know, overall, maybe I'll start with you, Ivana, like how do you balance and think about the patient needs when you're developing budgets? Is there anything you consider? Is there anything unique you've ever come across that maybe you've, you know, brought forward as part of your negotiations and you know, had success in kind of advocating for your patients?
Well, for us, the transportation cost is actually the most important, and our patients will always actually ask if they will get some type of reimbursement. Um, so that is basically the most important thing to them, and we always include it in our budgets. The sponsors are different, you know, so depending on the sponsor, you will get a different a level of the transportation reimbursement, but it never hurts to ask.
Of course, of course. And maybe Bella and Evelyn, from your unique perspective too, have you, I don't know, have you come across any unique or unexpected patient needs that, you know, you might be able to talk about how you were able to help support addressing those needs, you know, or how you think about addressing patient needs overall when setting up your budgets?
Yeah, I think in this case, like I said earlier, the $100 is standard, but it's more so when we put the wording in the contract, and that's when we have to analyze in the real life situation where, like I said, a patient might have to travel far. And then sometimes I've noticed where when I've gotten these inquiries, even if a patient has to fly in, it's very rare that we see a patient needing to fly into a site. But at that time, we noticed that we're very accommodating. Another example would just be these budgets are also created with like logic and real world situations in mind. Like, for example, you know, we take into account like the demographics of our patient. For example, if it's like for a children's study, since we're minors or even the elderly, we do offer a caregiver stipend, you know. And then also just sometimes we'd have to assess on a case by case situation where maybe a patient just they're immobile or they just need a caregiver with them.
Mhm.
So we'll take that into account as well.
Okay, perfect. Ivana, maybe I'll direct this question to you. So Evelyn and Bala talked a little bit about Grant Plan, which is a tool that they use to help them develop costing for their budgets. Um, you know, do you use any electronic tools or technology, you know, in your day-to-day work, whether that's negotiating budgets or
Mhm.
tracking budgets or, you know, developing budgets? I'm wondering if there's anything out there that you use or you know of that might be helpful to people.
Well, when I mentioned that our Office of Research Administration is very helpful, they do have for all the researchers at Unity Health, they have the Excel spreadsheet. It's a template that already includes different costs for pharmacy, core lab, imaging. Um, so researchers can use that Excel spreadsheet and just input the other cost that is specific for them. Unfortunately for us, it's mostly it's geared towards the drug trials, so it's not really helpful for us running device trials. But me and my colleagues in my team have been doing this for a very long time, so we already know what the costs are that we need to include in our budget. So um, it's not very time consuming for us to review the budget and update it and send it back to the sponsor.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, great. Maybe I'll move, actually, we have a lot of quite a few questions in the chat, so maybe I'll move on to some of the chat questions. I'll just remind everybody that yes, a recording of today's webinar will be available on the CTO website. We've had a few questions about that. So let me start off here. This one I think will go to Bala and Evelyn. Someone's asking, is there a reason that Roche does not share line item costs? It's extremely difficult for sites to be able to properly negotiate and a lot more work from their side. Most of the sponsors share line items so that sites can do a proper cost analysis. This might be, I don't know, unique to Roche. I don't know how other sponsors might do it, but I don't know if you want to address that a little bit.
Yes, so for Roche, our current practice is to send out a blind budget, right? Meaning that we are not showing line item at the SOA level. So we would like to, negotiate with the total visit cost. So we find it, like the experience I got is easier when we negotiate the total cost instead of line item. Because sometimes, when it comes to line item, we just need to, spend a lot of time back and forth to negotiate the line item instead of, like we look at the total per patient cost. The only line item that we negotiate is, when it show up on the invoiceable, then we will negotiate line item by line item. So I hope that, it makes sense to you, when it comes to negotiation in a total visit cost, that we send out the blind budget. But we don't just, like send out a blind budget, without any flexibility. If the site finds this is really easier for them, like they can request, we unblind the budget and then we negotiate from there.
Okay.
But,
Oh.
I don't really, receive a lot of requests that, we have to unblind the budget, like especially for our in-source studies. For some study that we asked the CRO to do the clinical trial for us, some of them, yes.
Okay. Another question we have here is, what percentage of the total budget would a sponsor release as site initiation costs for the site to get started? Maybe from your perspective, if you want to address that.
So from our point of view, we don't really use a percentage. We kind of just from grant plan, we just pull our startup costs, and we pay that as soon as the budget is executed. In any case, there are sometimes a situation where a site doesn't want to begin until we pay ethics fees. Then in that case, we're always willing to create a letter of understanding so that we can get those fees out before site is activated.
And then Ivana, maybe we'll direct this one to you. Which budget is better for site? Invoiceable items paid quarterly, or a standard budget and returning the money not spent?
When you say standard budget, you mean to invoice for everything, or? I mean, for us, it comes down to it's basically a convenience, because for the items that are paid quarterly, the sponsor will look at what is entered in the database, and they will pay based on that for patients. So how many patients you had and how many patients visits you had in the quarter, that's what they're going to pay. But and it will be automatic. So the site doesn't really have to think about it. They don't really have to think about the invoicing deadlines, nothing like that. If you would like to be sort of in charge of all of that and invoice for everything, then you will have to have a person go through the database, see what's entered, make sure that everything is entered in this that particular quarter, make an invoice, send it to the sponsor based on the deadline for that quarter. For busy sites and for busy coordinators, that might not be a good thing. So you will still go through because once the sponsor makes a payment, they will send the supporting documentation, and they will say, this is what we are paying for in this quarter. So you will still have to go through the supporting documentation and take a look and make sure that everything is paid, nothing was accidentally omitted. But it will be a little bit less time consuming for the site. So it depends on the site's point of view, I guess.
Great. Okay. Someone else has asked, how do we negotiate once the costs increase during the contract? So I'm guessing during the course of the study, if the site finds that, oh no, what we initially negotiated isn't covering things, do you have recommendations on how to negotiate and approach that?
Well, it will have to be a CTA amendment. You will have to go to the sponsor and explain to them what happened and tell them why the price is higher and have the backup documentation. But it's not impossible. It's doable. It's the protocol. It's the CTA amendment.
Evelyn or Bala, do you have any suggestions to add?
Yeah, so I was actually gonna say this is probably one of like the harder things about negotiating. Sometimes there's a timing difference where we'll send out a budget and sometimes the sites are busy, so they don't get back to us right away. And in that time, especially in this changing economy, the costs have gone up. So like I said earlier, Grand Plan, they update the cost quarterly. So for example, if I did a budget last quarter and we're only negotiating now, I am going to update our internal numbers during negotiation. So it's even if it seems like a large increase just on the spreadsheet when we're working on it, we're still looking at the current numbers. So I hope that helps. And I have, for example, like I've seen many increases where initially when we looked at it, we thought, okay, maybe we'll have to reject it. But then as soon as we update the budget, we realize, okay, we're well within our rights to approve that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to add on to what Bala said. And other than that time, when we have protocol amendment, and then that is the time that the site may ask for budget amendment at the same time, because we are doing amendment anyway. So I don't receive a lot of budget amendment alone, that request. We can do it, right? Because that's a reason that, for increased price that we realize that we will agree to do the budget amendment to accommodate the increased price. But most of the time that when the site wants to do budget amendment is the same time that we have protocol amendment, so we can do everything at the same time.
Mhm. Okay. Bottom line, though, it sounds like it is doable. You can
Yeah.
ask the sponsor, have some documentation to help support that.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Okay, we have another question. Quantities are rarely used in sponsor budgets now, in my experience, or the one who's asking, as they've become a rate limiting step in the reimbursement level as we reach those estimated amounts. Can Roche perhaps remove this and keep in your internal budgets if a total study costing is relevant for you? I think that's a very specific question, but I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so just the way Roche works internally is that these budgets, like the max compensation you see, is pretty much our PO limit. So without putting in the quantities and the patients and kind of limiting it, we can't internally approve any of these contracts or POs because in that case it'll be kind of like a blank check, if you will, right? So internally we're not going to be able to do that. And I hope that answers the question. Maybe not the response you wanted to hear, but internally we can't.
Okay. All right. We have another question. Can we also reimburse a participant's time spent in a visit? It's harder to quantify compared to travel costs. That's interesting. I don't know if anyone wants to
So
take a stab.
yeah, I'll take a stab at it. So recently we're in like the very, very early stages of this. Is what we're trying to do is because we're trying to be more inclusive and diversify our patients. Um, there's a team here they're currently looking into um, pretty much compensating patients based on like right now I think they're more focusing on rare diseases where it's harder to recruit and like we were saying earlier where maybe where the patient you need to recruit isn't really near one of our institutes. So what they're currently looking into is like for example they're taking into different factors like timing of a visit, how long the patient actually has to spend, like for example, like their whole day. Is it just a few hours? Is there an extra caregiver? We're trying to factor all these in and kind of come up with the compensation for each visit. It's in the very early stages, so I don't think you'll see it roll out right away, but Roche is currently working on that. Now, again, it's not going to be for every patient. So it doesn't cover the initial question there, but I think we're slowly trying to roll out and to see where it takes us for at least the rare diseases.
Okay. I don't know, Ivana, have you ever encountered a situation where a sponsor is somehow reimbursing for the time of the visit? I guess that's what this is asking, right? Time
I,
spent.
as a research coordinator, I am hesitant
Hmm.
because there is a potential for this to be viewed as a coercion and paying a patient to be in the study. So I am quite hesitant to say yes, let's go and pay patients for their time. Because that when the patient is deciding to be a part of the research study in sort of a ethics theory has to be free of all the influences, right? Including the paying for their time. So that's the reason why I'm kind of hesitant to say yes.
So then let me ask you this follow-up question, which is coming from the chat, because I think this ties in well. Is time spent by the participant during a research visit, does that make any difference when you're negotiating, the patient stipend? Is that something?
Uh, the time, how long they will spend with the team during the visit?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
no.
Okay. I think there's a couple comments in the chat that if anybody wants to look at and see what their colleagues are thinking, but you can see that there. Someone else is asking, what are some of the standard activities where a sponsor does not offer overhead? And is there a specific rule? And maybe this varies by sponsor, but Evelyn and Bala, maybe that's something you can shed some light on.
So in the example I showed earlier where I said everything has overhead, the only ones that really don't have it are the ethic fees. Those are kind of pass through.
Yeah.
So if a site deals with their local IRB, they kind of just push that forward to us. And that's the only time we don't really include overhead.
Okay. Um, And then let's see, let me just have a look. So here's someone asking a question. I'm from pharmacy and we work with a research coordinator to create our pharmacy specific budget for our services. Do you have any advice on that process? I know, Ivana, you're primarily in devices. I don't know
Yes.
if you work with the pharmacy as well, or even other departments, I guess, that you might be able to help give some advice on developing,
Well,
specific budgets.
we have a great research pharmacy at St. Michael's Hospital, and um, they have the procedures and prices all developed for different studies. But our other departments as well, like imaging, medical imaging, or the echo departments, they all have a research study specific pricing, probably already developed. So that's why I mentioned when I was talking that, for research coordinators is and developing the budget, the best friend is the team leader from a different department because they are a wealth of resources and knowledge that you will need. So you need to make friends with them.
Great. Okay. And I think this one also is for you, Ivana.
Mhm.
Site staff dealing with research finance department face quite a few hurdles as there are a lot of delays, back and forth communication. How could research staff make the research finance staff life easier to get better cooperation and faster turnaround times? I don't know if you work with research finance at your institution in sort of a similar capacity.
Um, well, yes, we didn't. So there is a different. We have different departments. We have like a research contracts. They are dealing with the review of the contracts. And then we have research finance, and research finance mostly deals with our accounts, right? So once the payments are coming in, what are the specific accounts that they need to be deposited to, and what's coming out of the certain account. So um, in my experience, they were quite well organized and responsive. So I'm not quite sure what the question refers to exactly. So
Yeah, and Suni, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask. I would imagine I've always had really good luck asking people, what can I do to make your life
absolutely,
easier? What can I
absolutely.
do, right, to help you? Is also very helpful too. That often, quite often works if you ask people directly. Another question from the chat, are we allowed to add to the budget the time we spend on invoicing the sponsor? Ooh. I don't know if anybody wants to answer that or
Okay, I take it from here. All right, so to pay for invoicing us to the sponsor, I think that like this is well covered by the overhead that we pay to the site, right? Because yeah, this is supporting staff, and then this is invoicing is part of the administration cost to support the whole clinical trial. So that's why we pay the overhead. So like a specific line item to pay for the finance department, like we don't do that. I don't think that any sponsor will pay extra for finance department.
okay. Fair enough. Okay. I'm going to actually, we did receive a couple questions as part of the registration that I'll bring forward now. One of them was, how do you respond to a sponsor regarding monitoring charges? So, for example, the sponsor has stated that a monitoring fee is not acceptable to them, that it is the standard of conducting a clinical trial. The sponsor is mandated to conduct monitoring, and so a fee is not acceptable. I don't know if you have any advice or experience, around negotiating that you might want to share.
Oh,
Me?
okay.
Sure, yeah, Ivana. We can start with there. Yeah.
Well, I don't think that in this particular instance, the monitoring fee, I think there is a little bit of a misunderstanding because it is, I think in this particular question is monitoring fee is not for the monitor to come in and monitor the work. I think that it's about the time that the coordinator on the site will spend during the monitoring visit, giving the documentation to the monitor, providing access to the patient records, all of that. I think it's a little bit of different point of views. So in terms of, I agree, like with the sponsor, the sponsor should not be paying for the monitor to go and monitor the work. But I also understand the site's point of view, and I think the sites needs to be reimbursed for the coordinator's time during the monitoring visit. So I think a little bit of rewording here is just what's required, like explanation to the sponsor.
Okay. I don't know if any.
I can add to that.
Yeah.
So from sponsor point of view here, so monitoring is part of the business. So in the past, we don't pay monitoring visit as a separate line item in the past. But since pandemic, things change. Even, pandemic changed the way our clinical trial works. So Ivana, you can agree to me, once we have the pandemic and when the institute locked down, we're starting to starting to pay remote monitoring. So, and then, this is the time that, we recognize that, study coordinator, they have to spend with the monitor. And this is really, outside the clinical trial. So we recognize that. So that's why we pay for it. Now, after, the lockdown, that restriction lifted, and then I received more requests that we pay for the on-site monitoring, using the same reason, which I get it, right? Because, now when we have the staff shortage problem, and it's very hard for the institution to find people, and also they have to pay double maybe to the staff staying behind. So as long as I have this like justification, the explanation back from the site telling me like why they need us to pay the extra monitoring fee, I would pay it.
Okay, thank you. Um, and there is a comment, in the chat saying that monitoring visits do put a burden on staff in terms of preparing and scanning documents and the coordinator's time. So they appreciate having budgets cover that. The other question I'll bring to you is how do you account for staff salary in your industry budgets? I think maybe Ivana, this might be more a question for you. Do you
Well,
account for staff salary in your budgets? How do you incorporate that if you do?
well, the sponsor will not pay directly the salary for the coordinator.
Mm.
The sponsor will pay the coordinator's time during the study visit. Now, if you have several trials, then the salary will be coming from, the institution. It might be covered by the clinical trial budget to a point. The sponsor cannot pay for the coordinator's salary because that would mean that the coordinator works for the sponsor, and that would be a conflict of interest. So the coordinator is always paid by the institution, the hospital, the community hospital, the clinic, because we need to avoid any potential or perceived conflict of interest.
Okay. I don't know if Evelyn or Bala, if you have any comments on that, if you've ever encountered a request.
I totally agree with Ivana.
Okay.
We don't really pay any salary at the site or the institute. We pay the overhead charge, right?
Mhm.
This is well covered, like whatever, the salary portion, right? The site needs to take a portion of it. So yeah, conflict of interest, this is the big thing.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I've gotten through all the questions. Oh, wait, there's one more question for Ivana, I think. Does your rule apply to international collaborating sites so that the sponsor does not pay for or part of the participating site's coordinator salary?
When you say international collaborating site, is that would that be like an industry sponsored trial? Would that be like a grant?
Yeah, Kathy, do you want to unmute and ask or CIHR funded, she
Oh,
says.
so if it's a grant, then when you apply for the grant, you will include the salary item in the grant. So that is a different different situation.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm just looking at the time. We're just 3 minutes short of ending. And I think we've gotten through all the questions that were in the chat. So that was so great. Thank you very much, Ivana and Evelyn and Bella. And thank you to all the attendees as well. This is a topic we are always getting requests for, and there's always questions. So we really do appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I'll just remind everybody that there will be a survey that appears on your screen at the end of the webinar. So if you complete that, send us your feedback, and we're happy to send you a certificate of attendance for this webinar. As always, you can keep an eye out on the CTO newsletter for information about future webinars. And once again, thank you everybody for participating and joining today. Take care. Have a good afternoon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye now.